If you've been on social media over the past few days, you've probably seen everyone talking about Black Ops 2 finally being playable on modern PlayStation consoles. Black Ops 2 is one of those games that almost everybody remembers. Whether you were playing multiplayer after school, spending hours in zombies, or arguing with your friends about which map is best, it was just one of those games that seemed to define an entire generation of gaming. But after reading the news, I kind of realized something. Black Ops 2 isn't really the biggest story here. The real story is what this says about PlayStation, because I think this exposes something PlayStation fans have been asking for over a decade. Has Sony been underestimating just how important backwards compatibility has been? And if they have, could this finally be the beginning of a change? It's honestly kind of incredible how much staying in power Black Ops 2 has. The game originally launched in 2012, and that's over a decade ago, well over a decade ago. Normally games fade away over a few years, but some of them stick it out. Players move on, sequels replace them, communities disappear, but somehow Black Ops 2 never really left. And it's funny because they have so many sequels. People still upload gameplay every day. There are still YouTubers dedicated entirely to it. People still rank it among the greatest Call of Duty games ever made. And I don't really think that's just nostalgia talking. Black Ops 2 came out during what many people consider Call of Duty's golden era. And ever since then, they've kind of been trying to replicate that, but it's a debate whether or not it's actually working. The multiplayer rewarded skill, the maps felt memorable, the progression system kept players invested, League play gave competitive players something meaningful to chase. Then there was Zombies, Mod of the Dead, Origins, Buried. These maps kind of became legendary. Even if you weren't the biggest multiplayer fan, chances are you have memories of surviving endless zombie rounds with your friends. It wasn't perfect, and you could argue that no game ever was, but it did have some sort of personality, you know? It felt complete. And I think that's one of the reasons people still love it to this day. The recent announcement isn't exciting simply because Black Ops 2 is getting more attention. What's exciting is that PlayStation players finally have an easier way to jump into the game. For years, if you wanted to revisit Black Ops 2 on PlayStation, you had to dust off old hardware. And you better hope your console still worked, you hope your disc still worked, and even hope the servers were still active. And obviously that creates some kind of friction. And the harder it becomes to access older games, the fewer people actually experience them. But that's why I've always said preserving games really matters. Not because we refuse to move forward, but because gaming has a history worth protecting. Movies don't disappear every time a new format releases, right? Music doesn't become inaccessible because there's a new streaming service that launched. In fact, music still has CDs and records. Games deserve that same respect. Now before people start typing the angry comments, obviously some of my favorite games ever made were by Sony, and that's not a secret. But I also think it's okay to criticize companies where they miss opportunities, and backwards compatibility has always felt like one of those missed opportunities. The PS2 was famous for letting players continue playing PS1 games. Then the original launch PS3 supported earlier PlayStation generations through hardware compatibility. But over time, those features disappeared, and I always wondered why. When the PS4 launched, there was essentially no backwards compatibility. Millions of players suddenly couldn't access their PS3 libraries on the new console. And that decision frustrated a lot of people. Sony's explanation wasn't as simple as flipping a switch. The PS3 used a unique processor architecture that made compatibility incredibly difficult. From a technical standpoint, that challenge was real. But from a player's perspective, the result was the same. People lost easy access to years of PlayStation history. Then the PS5 arrived. Thankfully, almost every PS4 game actually worked, and that was a huge improvement. But the conversation never really ended because it kept fans asking, what about the PS3, what about the PS2, or the PS1? Why are so many incredible PlayStation games still trapped on old hardware? Meanwhile, Xbox kinda took a different path. Whether you're a fan of Xbox or not, I think it's fair to give Microsoft some credit here. Years ago, Xbox made backwards compatibility more of a priority, at least with Call of Duty, you know, and maybe a couple other games. They weren't just thinking about the next blockbuster release, they were thinking about preserving an entire gaming library. That meant players could revisit older Call of Duty games, older RPGs, older shooters, and older racing games. Some even received visual improvements and performance boosts without developers rebuilding them from scratch. It sent a message. Buying games wasn't just about today. It was about building a library that stayed with you. Although I do think they could do some things a little bit better with that, it is still something that I wish more platforms would embrace. Because digital libraries are getting larger every year. People invest hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars into games. The expectation that those purchases remain accessible doesn't feel unreasonable, and especially if PlayStation is already trying to cut physical games, right? It just adds to this problem. They better have some kind of way to play every single, game on future consoles if they're getting rid of physical discs. But here's where I think the conversation does get pretty interesting. If people are this excited over Black Ops 2, imagine what would happen if Sony fully embraced its own history. Resistance, Killzone, Motorstorm, SOCOM, Little Big Planet, Infamous, the list goes on. These aren't forgotten games, they're games people still talk about to this day. Entire communities would come back overnight if these classics became easily available again. And it wouldn't just benefit older players. There are some younger gamers that experience these titles as well. Imagine buying a PS5 and instantly having access to decades of PlayStation titles. And that's pretty powerful. It turns your console into more than just a machine for a few new releases. It almost becomes a museum or a library, or like a celebration of gaming. I do know you can pay for PlayStation Premium and be able to play some of PlayStation's retro games, but I hate that it's behind a paywall. And to be honest with you, even when you are playing, the controls seem a little bit wonky, so I feel like that's something else that they could probably work on fixing, especially if they're making people pay a premium for it already. Something I've been thinking about recently is how games can disappear. We've already seen digital storefronts shut down, servers close forever, games get delisted because of expired licenses. Entire franchises become almost impossible to experience legally. And that's pretty concerning because unlike movies, games do require hardware. They require software and they do require support. If companies don't preserve them, then they are essentially gone. That's why I don't think backwards compatibility is just a nice feature anymore. I think it's becoming part of just gaming history, especially now that so many purchases are digital. Ownership, unfortunately, looks different than it did 15 years ago, which makes preserving access even more important. Now, I don't think this announcement makes Sony's philosophy change completely. That would be just jumping to conclusions. But I do think it's another reminder that there's enormous demand for classic games. If anything, bringing those experiences to modern hardware introduces them to an entirely new generation. And that's good for everyone. Developers get renewed interest, publishers make additional revenue, players get more value from their consoles. It's one of those rare situations where everybody wins, right? But I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments below. What do you guys think about them bringing back Black Ops 2, and what games do you wish was easier to play on the PS5? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Pause for now, play forever. AK out.